So, like I said, I start the morning with like the smoothie, and the smoothie is glyphosate-free honey, creatine monohydrate, probably 10 grams in the smoothie to start, bee pollen, maybe a little bit of royal jelly, raw milk, maybe some raw meats, some hardened soil desiccated organs, especially a desiccated testicle, and I'm trying to think what else is in there. I'm missing something. That's basically it. Maybe some acerola for the vitamin C, and then maybe some frozen organic blueberries. So that's the start to the day. Then at lunch and dinner, I have sort of a simple diet. I kind of repeat the same meal for lunch and dinner, and I have grass-fed beef, usually skirt steak or ribeye or filet with some fruit and some squash.
Paul Saladino, good to have you back, man.
Thanks for having me.
All right, let's just jump right into it. So not counting calories, but losing fat, getting lean. All right, what do you eat, man?
So this is a really huge topic. Have you ever done the research on where the idea of calories comes from? It's crazy history, man. This is like untold history. So the idea of a calorie comes from the 1890s. There was a guy named Wilbur Atwater, and he took a bunch of foods and he burned them in a bomb calorimeter. And he looked to see how much heat they produce. Like a calorie is a heat measure. You know this. But humans are not a furnace. We are not one of these like coal burning engines in a cartoon, like where some bad character is shoveling a bunch of coal into this engine and the train is going faster and faster off a cliff. Like we are not a coal burning engine. We are not a heat producing furnace. We are complex beings that derive energy from food based on electrons. But there's no way you can put an electron measure on a package of food. And so, you think about how do we get food? Like if you're eating a banana, an orange, a steak, whatever, you are getting food from the stored carbohydrates and protein and fat in there from electrons that are in those molecules that your body pulls out of those molecules and moves into intermediate molecules, NADH, FADH2, through beta oxidation or glycolysis in the Krebs cycle, and then puts them in the electron transport chain. Like the production of heat is not how we run our body. It is the movement of electrons, but that's not what's on the label. What's on the label is a heat measure of these foods.
I put a link down below for 30% off all things from Thrive Market on your first order. Now, they're not just about snacks and pantry staples. They've got good, legit, high protein foods, which is how I live. Even my snacks are high protein. Thing is, if you go to a grocery store, the high protein snacks, they're kind of playing games with you. Like they'll call it high protein, but you look at the ingredients and you realize that there's like some weird kind of like pea protein or something. Not that there's anything wrong with pea protein, but the reality is it's not what it seems on the surface. And it might only be 4 grams of protein. The thing I like about Thrive is you see what you get and you get what you see. It's transparent. So you can look at the ingredients and they're not gonna have garbage there and you're gonna be able to see it. And then it gets delivered right to your doorstep. So you're not having to spend time. Even myself, I know what to look for at a grocery store, but it takes me probably 25% longer to go grocery shopping than the average person because I do cross-reference everything that's in the ingredients. I don't like to bring that stuff into my house. Thrive Market takes that guesswork out of the equation for me, and it makes it accessible to me, but it makes it accessible to people all over the country. So that's what's really cool. So that link gets you 30% off your entire first grocery order and gets you a free $60 gift. Not to mention it gets delivered right to your doorstep, which is pretty darn cool, and their shipping is speedy fast. So that link down below.
And so it started in 1890 with Wilbur Atwater. Then in the 1950s and 60s, the diet books started with saying, hey, count calories, and that's how you lose weight. And then, like, even before that, in World War I and World War II, the US government needed to know about how do we ration food? How do we create some metric that gives us an idea of how much food to give a soldier? So calories have sort of snuck into our lexicon gradually, but I don't think that it's the whole story. And I think that in a lot of ways, they're very misleading. And I think that in the last 50 years, especially, there's kind of a sordid story of how some of these processed food companies have leveraged the idea of calories against us. So I think counting calories based on the literature and based on this kind of sketchy underbelly history of how they've been used to confuse us is the worst way to lose weight. I mean, you look at the studies, there are meta-analyses of 80 plus studies showing that calorie counting fails in 80+% of the time for people to lose weight and keep it off at 3 to 5 years. It works in the short term, right? some people in the space would say, you can lose weight eating donuts. You can lose weight eating pizza. Absolutely, you can. You can eat 1,000 calories of pizza a day and lose weight. But how are you going to feel? You're not going to feel satiated. You're going to be micronutrient deficient. And at some point, your body will break you out of that calorie prison and you will binge because you must. This is a survival instinct that is ingrained in us as humans over the last 300,000 years. And now we have hundreds, literally, of studies to back up the fact that counting calories does not work long-term to lose weight, and yet it is still the central point. It is really the most commonly prescribed idea or philosophy for weight loss. If you go to a doctor and you're obese, they're going to tell you, eat less, move more. When the literature does not support that. This is crazy. We're talking about evidence-based medicine. The literature simply does not support that strategy. And even in the last 20 to 30 years, we've seen, there's these crazy things. Do you know what the Global Energy Balance Network is?
No.
So in 2015, the New York Times broke a story. Coca-Cola funded secretly the Global Energy Balance Network. And this was a network that was kind of promoting calories in, calories out. And the story has been told over and over. In the 1960s and 70s, the Sugar Research Foundation secretly funded researchers at Harvard to blame saturated fat and not sugar for heart disease and these other things. So like sugar-based ultra-processed food companies have been messing with the messaging of our food supply for 70 plus years. And even in the last 10 years, Coca-Cola was secretly funding an organization aimed at really convincing us to lean into this calories in, calories out model. Eat less, move more, restrict calories, you lose weight. Because what does it do for the processed food manufacturers? It gives them a pass. It's okay to eat 100 calories of Oreos and a snack pack as long as you walk more in the afternoon, or as long as you eat less and balance out energy. This idea of energy balance, it always kind of bothers me because what is energy balance? Yeah. It doesn't work. And yet we have very intelligent, well-intentioned physicians and people in the nutrition space still saying just be an energy balance. And yet what does that do for people? It gives them, I would say, a very confusing metric with which to use for their weight loss. Because how do I know how many calories I'm going to burn today, Thomas? And guess what? This is what's never accounted for. The quality of the calories you put in, and we'll talk about what food quality means, determines the calories you get out. So calories in affects calories out. And we know that calories in, the quality of the calories you put in affect your hunger. And ultimately, I think long-term weight loss success is based on hunger and happiness. If you become hungry, you are going to overeat. You are going to break out of calorie prison. And what are you going to go for? You're going to binge on something. You're not going to break out of a calorie restricted prison and eat a steak. You're going to eat a donut or a cookie or something else because your body is so stressed. You've been restricting the calories for so long. So this idea of calories in, calories out, energy balance, it works for processed food companies. It doesn't work for humans, right? Because So to me, this is kind of sinister. And in some ways, I'm kind of saying this tongue in cheek, but it's true in some ways when we think about the history, it's kind of a psyop. Yeah. And I think that it just fails for people. So what's the solution? The solution is food quality. What does that mean? Most of us understand what quality food is. It's single ingredient foods or foods with labels that your grandmother or your great-grandmother would recognize. I just call this the great-grandmother rule. So you walk into a grocery store, single ingredient foods are basically the foods around the outside of the grocery store. It's meat, whatever, red meat, chicken, fish, whatever, eggs, milk, and it's plants. So fruits and vegetables. Yeah, I'm not a huge fan of vegetables, but if people want to eat vegetables, great, do it. If you eat single ingredient foods, you will lose weight. Yeah. Full stop. If you eat single ingredient foods exclusively or for the majority of your diet, you will become healthier. Full stop. But that's not the messaging that Coca-Cola wants you to hear. And that's exactly what they're fighting against with things like the Global Energy Balance Network, these PSYOP organizations. And then, you look at a food with a label. Does your great-grandmother recognize the ingredients on that food? And if she doesn't, why are you eating it? Like that's so simple. That is what quality food is for me. And I think when humans do that, everything works. It's so simple because you think about micronutrient density and, it tracks directly with food quality. So that's how we create satiety long-term. And that's how humans lose weight. It's as simple as that. You almost don't even need to think about calories when you do that.
Do you think that possibly intake and output are on a completely different axis? And here's my point behind that. It's like calories in, or let's just say energy in, and may not have any
real effect on heat, right? Like, dietary induced thermogenesis to a certain degree, very small degree. But exercise output does seem to have some measurement of heat. It's almost as though they operate on a different axis in a way. It's almost like, okay, if you go back to calories in, calories out, it's like, just because you eat X number of calories doesn't mean you need to expend X number of calories. It almost seems like the output is just operating independently. Does that make sense?
I see what you're saying. And I think that yes. And like I said, the quality and the type of food you're eating affects your calories out also. And this is where the equation kind of goes off the rails, right? I think it's pretty clear that your metabolism, and especially your satiety, which affects calories in, but even your metabolism changes based on what foods you eat. We know there's a thermic effect of protein. We know that some foods are more thermic. And so I think that there is evidence that when you eat higher quality foods that are full of more micronutrients, your metabolism works better and you burn more calories. Yeah. And the reverse is also true. When you eat poor quality food that is micronutrient deficient, not macronutrients, right? So we're not carbs, protein, fat. That's an interesting conversation. Micronutrient deficient, coenzyme Q10, taurine, anserine, creatine, minerals, selenium.
These things exist for a reason.
These are all part of the complex biological workings of your metabolism in the mitochondria of every mitochondrial cell in your body, almost every cell in your body. And if that isn't supplied, the necessary intermediates, your metabolism doesn't work as well, and you burn less calories. And that, like, humans exist to move potential energy in food into kinetic energy, and that happens through the mitochondria, right? Because you think about what we are. We are anti-entropy, right? We are constantly in the process of fighting entropy. We are not decaying. We are actually preventing decay. We're
energy spun into matter.
We are energy spun into organized matter. Yeah. The energy from food is how we keep our matter semi-organized. We all age, but we must keep the matter organized. And if you don't give your body energy, ATP, ultimately at the level of the nanomotors in the mitochondria, you are not as good at repairing DNA, repairing cell membranes, recycling cellular proteins and membranes. Like, this is how we stay vibrant, fertile, fit, mentally clear, is we give our body sufficient energy through the mitochondria. Like, energy production is everything. If we are bad at producing energy, we are going to be decrepit.
These are more laws of the universe, right? Like, it's like the instrument, our instrument that takes in energy and spun into organized matter. It's just like it requires breath, right? It requires to breathe. These are laws of the universe. This is versus a law of thermodynamics that is like isolated in a chamber, right?
Well, yeah. And I mean, humans, this is where the calories in, calories out thing comes from, is like, oh, you can't violate the first law of thermodynamics. Yes, but we are thermodynamics being played out in a complex biological organism.
Yeah, it still exists. I think that's what people,
It still exists. Like, you're not violating the first law of thermodynamics by saying the quality of the food you eat affects how many calories you burn or how hungry you are. And the reason I think this is so important is because what I see happening in the health space or the food space now worries me. I see more and more foods being marketed as healthy or good that are really just, they're fake health foods, right? So this is the best example of this in recent times is David Bar. You've seen this thing? Mm-hmm. So talk about the great-grandmother rule. Like, if my great-grandmother reads a David Bar ingredient, she's not going to know what half the ingredients in there are, and she's definitely not going to know what this thing, esterified propoxylated glycerol is.
Yeah, what is this stuff? Okay,
this is bad.
I'm seeing it pop up more and more.
This is bad. So basically what this company, the parent company, is called EPA-G, and they made esterified propoxylated glycerol. It went through FDA approval, the GRAS, so the generally recognized as safe approval, in 2019. So it's a very recent addition to the human food supply. And I think it's a bad one. And it's reminiscent of Olestra. Remember Olestra? These trips.
Leakage.
Yes,
I remember that.
Leakage, yes. Yeah. This is reminiscent of that in so many ways. So Olestra was a non-absorbed fat, but it gave you the mouthfeel of fat, which humans like, because guess what? Evolutionarily, fat is essential for human health. There are numerous fat-soluble vitamins that we need to be healthy. Vitamin A, vitamin K2, vitamin E. Fat tastes good to us because historically, evolutionarily, it was essential for our survival. And now what we've said is, we're going to give you the mouthfeel of fat with less calories. So Olestra was the first incarnation. It's not even really on the market anymore because it had so many side effects and so horrible. And now EPG is the next incarnation, esterified propoxylated glycerol. It's kind of similar. So when you look at studies with EPG, 8 to 12 week studies, it definitely decreases absorption of fat-soluble vitamins. So beta carotene, vitamin K1 in the studies. So if it's doing K1, you know it's doing K2 and D and E. And the GI side effects with EPG are exactly the same, descriptors as Olestra. In the studies, spotting, gas with discharge, this is what EPG caused in people at higher doses. And so the concern here is a David bar has this EPG in it. And with this ingredient, the manufacturers are saying, hey, we're giving the most calorie per gram of protein, which doesn't make sense to me. Again, we're back to the calorie model. And we're saying, okay, we are going to pretend that if we stuff as much protein into this bar, and look, protein is great for humans. I think we all need it. But our philosophy with this bar, and this is just, I think, an epitome. This just epitomizes the thinking that I think has gone off the rails. We're going to stuff as much protein in this bar as possible and give you the fewest number of calories by packing it full of artificial flavors, artificial sweeteners, literally like sucralose, which I want to talk about, and this fake fat called EPG, which actually causes GI side effects in people and decreases fat-soluble vitamin absorption. That's how we're going to help people lose weight. This is so off the rails. It's the absolute wrong way to do it because you think about it, there are essentially zero micronutrients, not zero, but the micronutrient density of a David bar is abysmal, right? It's actually depleting you of fat-soluble vitamins. It is a negative.
That's so wild.
Yeah, it's a negative of fat-soluble vitamins in your body. You're going to eat it, and if you don't get leakage or spotting, it's going to decrease your absorption of fat-soluble vitamins. If you look at some of the reviews on Amazon, they're pretty funny.
What are other products that have this EPG in it? I've seen it in a few and I can't remember exactly what brands they are, but
So the thing that's happening right now is that David bar manufacturers bought Epigee. They bought the company that makes it and they took the supply from everybody else. So now they're getting sued for a monopoly violation because no one else can get it, which whatever, good or bad, or, neither here nor there. But the products that used to have it were like nut butters and chocolates. And so I think that...
that's what it was. It was the that Gatsby chocolate.
Gatsby chocolate, and there was a nut butter that had it. And I think that what will happen here, and what I'm concerned about, is that EPG, once the lawsuit is settled, if more companies have access to it, we will see EPG in 20 to 30 products in the grocery store. And humans will be getting 10, 20, 30 grams of this per day thinking, I'm going to lose a ton of weight because I can eat nut butter again. And so EPG has been described by one of their marketing people as the consistency of warm candle wax. So you should think about when you are eating EPG, you are kind of eating something like candle wax. And they're saying it doesn't matter. It's derived from canola oil, so it's derived from a seed oil. But the guys who created David Bar say it's no big deal because you don't absorb it. This is maybe the case that it actually doesn't have cardiovascular, implications, but the fact that you don't absorb it means that it depletes you of nutrients like fat-soluble vitamins, which are actually valuable for humans. So it's just this to me represents the completely wrong way that humans should go for weight loss. You don't want to eat the most fake foods that sabotage your satiety or confuse your brain that are the most nutrient devoid.
It's like the Walden Farms. You ever remember that brand? Mm-hmm. Walden Farms, it had all these 0-calorie salad dressings.
Yes.
Yeah, creepy stuff. Creepy.
This is not the way that humans lose weight. It's the opposite is true, right? You need to go higher quality food, not lower quality food. And so this is what bothers me is that I think that tons of foods will have EPG soon and we're just going to see humans going in the wrong direction. The other problem there is this sucralose. And there are studies with artificial sweeteners showing that humans lose more weight when they do Diet Coke versus a Coke with sugar, right? But the mechanism behind sucralose is pretty concerning. And I think that we need more research here and we don't have this fully figured out because you look at these artificial sweeteners and a study just came out showing that when humans consume sucralose versus sugar, sucralose increases blood flow to the hypothalamus, which is the satiety center. And so the implication here, and then on the metrics they looked at in the study, humans were hungrier with the sucralose versus processed sugar, which isn't great for humans either. But I think that the research is not clear on these artificial sweeteners. And my concern is, again, you are going for lower quality food that is potentially making you hungrier, sabotaging your satiety, and you're just going to end up failing in the long term, right? So what do we know about these things long term? Does artificial sweeteners, maybe they help in the short term, but in the long term, people become hungrier and gain the weight back? I mean, I've seen multiple doctors, well-respected doctors, talk about the patients in their practices, and they say, the research says these artificial sweeteners are maybe okay, but in my practice, I observe that when I remove them from my patients, many of my patients actually do better. Yeah. And they suddenly lose that stubborn 5 to 10 pounds. So there's something else going on here. And again, the solution is so simple. Like, just eat unprocessed foods, eat simple foods, single ingredient foods, and foods your great grandmother would recognize. Like, why are we trying to complicate that?
So based on what you're saying now, and this is, I hope it doesn't put you on the spot too much. I'm just genuinely curious. Like, if you had to choose between like a pure like cane sugar soda and a diet soda, what would it be now?
This is one of these like unwinnable things, right?
I know. But
right?
I'm just curious, like, where are you now?
I don't know what you would do in that situation. I don't drink either, But what I will tell you is this. If you look at something like honey, the choice is very clear, right? Because I think that the goal is to create products for humans, or to create like an industry ethos where people don't have to make that choice.
Yeah.
What if you had a soda or a drink that was sweetened with honey? Well, then you're looking at a completely different situation, because there are natural sugars. And I think that the mechanism here is that there are so many plant compounds in honey or even maple syrup that affect the gut flora. And I think the mechanism has to do with dysbiosis and ultimately with lipopolysaccharide. And I've shown this in, I've done some tweets about this on X. It's kind of complicated, but if you look at sugar, pure sugar versus apple juice, pure sugar increases endotoxin in the human body, probably because you put a bunch of glucose or fructose into the human gut, and there's nothing there to kind of check the overgrowth of bacteria. Gram-negative bacteria propagate, and you're going to get more endotoxin, lipopolysaccharide, which is a gram-negative bacterial cell wall component, into the blood circulation. But you give someone apple juice and that doesn't happen. And so this has actually been shown across multiple like sugar versus fruit, and honey does the same thing. You can give, I think it's an animal study, but they gave animals 2 types of sugar and, 2 types of honey and processed sugar, and the honey actually mitigated the rise in lipopolysaccharide that animals get when you feed them processed sugar. So I think it's something with the numerous polyphenolic and other plant compounds in the honey or apple juice or watermelon juice, and these serve to just probably modify the way that gut flora populations change in the human gut. Totally, that makes so much sense.
I have never, and I mean, I could be wrong, but I've never ever seen a study where the benefits of honey do not prevail. Like, honestly, like in every single thing, it's looking at honey versus other fruit, versus polyphenols, like every single time without fail, honey wins.
But honey has calories, Thomas. So maybe we shouldn't eat it. It's like, wait, it's more complicated than calories. And so, I mean, I think this is what it comes down to here is convenience. So this is where the processed food manufacturers get us. They get us with convenience, because look, it's one thing for me to sit in a studio with you and say, the answer is simple. Just go to the grocery store, eat a chicken breast, eat a steak, eat some salad if you want. I don't eat salad, but if people want to eat salad, great. Eat a sweet potato. But I think people say, I don't have time for that. I work, I have kids, and I get it. Like, we have constraints on our time. And so I think that the way that these processed food manufacturers, and I will say David Barr is a ultra-processed food manufacturer now, I don't think that they're doing the right thing. And I think that many, and they're not the only ones, like this idea of protein Pop-Tarts and protein cookies, this has exploded. Like, these companies are very popular now, but it's convenient. And so that's where we get people. We say, oh, well, we're going to give you a slightly less expensive option. They're still expensive, but we're going to give you a reasonably priced option that is convenient for you. And that's going to be helpful for you. When in fact, it's just kind of a Faustian bargain. Like, no, we have to really fight against the convenience. But I know that the thing is that humans are just programmed to be convenient. And so we always go for this. And so like I said, I think that my hope is that more companies will just put products in the market that are better for humans. I mean, that was really the intention. And I never thought I would be in this position, but that was why I created Lineage. Like, I wanted this might sound weird, but I wanted to like push back against the processed food companies somehow.
Yeah, for sure.
And give people like, okay, here's a convenient option that I actually believe in. Like, when you look at the calories per gram on like air dried steak from Lineage, like, or just a lean jerky or even a chicken breast, they're just as good as a David Bar. And it is a micronutrient rich food that my sense is like, it's certainly going to leave you less hungry, more satiated long-term. So like, I think that we need more options for people. So I hope someone will create, like you said, a drink that has honey, right, as a sweetener that doesn't mess up your gut flora. And you won't have to make the decision between Diet Coke and sucrose Coke, right? And that's what I'm trying to do with, like the ability that I have now to create. I want to create companies and products that give people a convenient option that's better, because I think without that, we're screwed, right?
For sure, man.
There's no way. What do you do?
Do you think that heating and processing honey denatures it? Like, for example, like if you were so if you were to try to make honey into a powder that you could bake with or something, it would probably break it down.
I mean, somewhat, but I would bake with honey powder before I would bake with processed sugar.
Yeah, I mean, ditto, that's what I'm like. But
that's the best possible option,
Yeah.
Because
it's not necessarily the macronutrient composition of it. I mean,
no,
so if you were to take honey and zap all the antioxidants and polyphenols, and you were just left with even the bare sugars of it, like trehalose and fructose, and like, you don't think that it probably would still be better than a completely refined sugar, but not the same, right?
Yeah, not the same. But like you look at things like molasses. Molasses is along the chain of purification of sugar, right, from a sugar cane. Molasses is valuable for humans. Molasses doesn't have the same outcomes that a processed sugar does. So at some point and molasses has been heated is what I'm saying. Yeah. So like honey, the thing I like about honey is that it hasn't been heated. You find a raw organic, and this is, Lineage makes a honey, and I wanted to make a raw organic glyphosate-free honey. So if you're looking for honey, try and find something that's tested for glyphosate, this herbicide. And so it hasn't been heated at all. Like you can get a source of carbohydrates. I mean, we were just drinking honey post-workout together, and you were telling me that you like honey in your diet now. So honey's great.
I would consider it a staple, legit.
Right?
It's a staple.
It's a staple.
Because like I'm very deliberate about my carbohydrates, and like realistically, like there's not a whole lot on that list that I would eat, right? Because I'm not a big grains guy. Sweet potatoes are great, but they do start to get to me after a while, right?
How so?
If I start eating them like consistently, like after like 2-3 weeks of doing, 100 grams a day or, worth of carbs a day of sweet potatoes, I start feeling distended. I start feeling like it's kind of going the other way for me. I start retaining water. So, I mean, I've just found that maybe we're not designed to just like consume that many sweet potatoes, right? Like, so I'm trying to get to maybe 200 or 300 grams of carbs on some days, just to like, I'm really trying to push it and test it, right? You've challenged me on some of this stuff, and I'm like, okay, like I will test it. I will go high carb on some of these days. And and I feel good doing it. But certain foods, like if I try to get 200 grams of carbs from sweet potatoes, that's not a pleasant thing, right?
That's a lot of sweet potatoes.
Yeah. So like, okay, honey makes it pretty easy for me to get there. And it's been a staple for me because it's a very deliberate way for me to get to a certain, intake that I want to test, right?
There's a tribe, I think they're African. They're Mbuti, Mbuti. They might be pygmy origin. At certain times of the year, they have 70+% of their calories from honey, and they remain metabolically healthy. Yeah. And again, I don't think humans need to do that. That's a lot of calories from honey. But when I was with the Hadza, I forget if we've talked about this in the past, we came upon a hive of bees while we were hunting with them on like a long day of hunting. And within a minute or two, they had a bow drill out. They were smoking out the bees, and they had the hive down, and we were eating honeycomb with larvae and honey in it. And I mean, the Hadza have been studied multiple times for cardiovascular health and stuff. So I think there's probably a window and a context. You're very active for people in terms of how many carbohydrates they need. But I think that for most of us, some amount of honey carbohydrates in the diet, maybe it's a tablespoon or even less per day, can be very interesting, very enjoyable, and probably even health promoting, especially if it's a raw organic glyphosate-free honey. Yeah. So I think it's a great thing. And the reason I say that is because people fear calories and they fear sugar, but just like all calories are not created equally, not all sources of sugar are created equally. The context matters so much. Yeah. And that's where I think the nuance in the conversation is so important for people, because I want the reason that I find meaning in what I do is because I think that it's really important to help give people information that actually works in their life. As you and I have talked about, the results of randomized controlled trials don't always play out in real life for humans. And I think that what you and I have both seen now, it's not randomized controlled trials, but it's hundreds or thousands of anecdotes that make you think, okay, there's something here, like we should pay attention to this phenomenon that we are observing. In my case, it's interesting. I was carnivore in the past. I include plant foods now, fruit and honey and squash. I don't eat vegetables still. But even yesterday, Thomas, I was at lunch I was out at Primal Pastures and I was doing a podcast out there with Bethany, and Bethany's sister-in-law sitting across the table from me. They made us this great spread of like ribeyes from the farm and fruit and honey. And it was an incredible spread. And her sister is sitting across from the table from me. And she says, I have lupus and I've been doing an animal-based diet. So she's been eating essentially meat plus fruit and raw milk for 45 days. And she said it has almost reversed all of her symptoms, which I thought was amazing. Every time somebody tells me this story, I think that's so cool. And what were you eating before? I asked her, and she said I was basically eating like paleo Whole30. And I thought, wow, you were actually eating healthy before, and now she's just cut out some vegetables, basically her vegetables and nuts. And for her, not for everyone, but for her, it really made a difference in her autoimmune disease. There may not be a randomized controlled trial to corroborate that outcome within my lifetime or your lifetime, but that is so meaningful. Like that actually helped her. And so the summed wisdom that we get, or just this observational intelligence that we get from meeting people and saying like, this worked for me, this didn't, I think like, wow, I don't think everyone needs to eat an animal-based diet and never eat a vegetable, but for her and for a lot of people I've met with intense autoimmune diseases, it helps. So that's wild. I definitely think some people can eat broccoli and be fine. Broccoli's been a contentious issue for me in the past, but for her, getting rid of it actually improved her autoimmunity. That's cool. And this is just to say that we don't need randomized controlled trials to suggest something to people. Give it a try. I think that based on what I've seen with sucralose, people should probably cut it out and see if it helps you, right?
Your boy Jimmy was saying something really interesting. Like this morning when we were working out, he was like, yeah, I normally can't eat pineapple. Like pineapple bothers me. Like it causes me all these issues. And he's like you. He just really listens to his body, right? And he was saying like, then all of a sudden I started having these crazy cravings for pineapple. Like my body just needed pineapple. And I started eating pineapple and I didn't have any digestive issues with it. And I think that those are the kind of anecdotes that sometimes they get pushed out. And I have a follow-up question on this that I think would be just a good discussion, because like I think there are elements that can't be measured and can't be put into a randomized control trial because either the cohorts would just be too small or too random or too sporadic, but we discount it, right? Like this, not even bioindividuality. There's certainly bioindividuality, and to a certain degree, I feel like sometimes saying bioindividuality is a cop-out because it's not actually saying like, it's not calling a spade a spade. It's just being like, everybody's different, when in reality, what we're trying to say here is like, there's a hell of a lot more going on, is what we're actually trying to say. And why is it that we have this obsession with RCTs? And this is coming from a guy that is a very, like, people enjoy my content because it's rooted in science and this and that. But like I was talking to Jimmy before, I'm getting increasingly frustrated because if I don't have an RCT to back it up, then does it magically not exist? Am I completely invalidated so everything that happened to me doesn't exist? It just magically disappears into the ethos and never existed in the first place because there wasn't an RCT to back it up. I understand why we need to have these things. Believe me, I understand why we have RCTs. I understand the beauty of a well-designed, well-crafted study. But why on earth do we throw out anecdote when it's probably one of the more powerful things?
Especially when you see anecdote with like big N numbers, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's one of the humbling but valuable things about what you and I do is that we might encounter more anecdote than the average person, right? I was just in Costa Rica I did an animal-based gathering there, and 120 people came. We had to cap it. And so here's 120 people with me, all telling me their stories. And so that's really valuable, summed human experience. I might go to the grocery store, and on some days I might see 2 or 3 people at a grocery store who come up to me and tell me a story. And that's so valuable to me, like what worked and what didn't, And so when someone comes up to me and they say, what you did, Paul, helped me, I always think like, what was it about what I did that helped you? And you hear the same thing over and over. And just because there's not an RCT doesn't mean that it's not a valuable thing that I think people should know about. I'm not saying it's the end all and be all. I'm not saying that it works for every person or that it's a panacea. But what people consistently tell me, Thomas, is cutting out processed food, help them lose weight, help them conceive, increased libido, increased testosterone. And in a lot of cases, people doing some sort of elimination diet or intentional eating, like an animal-based diet of meat and fruit and honey and raw dairy, a lot of times improved or reversed autoimmune conditions that they'd been told were unfixable by their doctor. ulcerative colitis, Crohn's, lupus yesterday, right? Eczema, psoriasis, multiple sclerosis, infertility, like things. Some of the most poignant stories for me are when a man or a woman comes to me and tells me, my doctor wanted to take out my colon, and changing my diet reversed my ulcerative colitis or my Crohn's so that I didn't have to have a colectomy. Like they say, like, if I had not changed my diet, I would have a colostomy, right? That's crazy, right?
And people get scared to even talk about anecdote now because there's these watchdog types that just, maybe they're well-intentioned, maybe they're not. Some I think are just downright dark, but it's just, and I get that there needs to be a checks and balances to a certain degree, but it's squelched people from talking about anecdote.
Yeah.
So we're no longer feeling like we can talk about our opinion. And sometimes it's just with your choice.
Or lived experience, not even opinion, it's a lived experience.
And sometimes it just comes in your choice of words. And I think people, like, if they can, I've learned to just choose my words wisely. Like, my experience. But I've started to realize that just by looking at comments and looking at what people say to me. I was at a conference this last week in Vegas, and people like, hey, my favorite videos from you, Thomas, are the ones where you talk about what's worked for you.
Yeah.
And I'm like, oh, so you're like, they're like, I love your science. I love that. But I love when you talk about what works for you, because that's what I actually want to listen to.
It's so valuable. Yeah. And I've talked about that in my journey also. And I think people have found that valuable. I think I did a video and I said, I tried rice, I tried creatine, and I tried white potatoes, and here are my results, And in the video I said, white rice made me feel a little foggy, and white potatoes made me feel like I wasn't digesting things well. That's just my experience. And creatine made me feel great. So now I'm taking creatine, and I don't eat rice and I don't eat potatoes, but I experimented. And I think that people found that to be so interesting that I would just experiment, right?
What dose of creatine do you take, by the way?
So I take creatine monohydrate. Lineage makes a really good one. And I take 5 to 10 grams a day, probably 10 grams a day. Mm. And then when I don't sleep well, I take 20. Yeah. So
take the morning after you didn't sleep well?
Yeah. And this is interesting. I mean, the data is fascinating. So I think about this for my mom, who's 74 and has osteopenia. And especially for women, she's never been told that she should take creatine. I was talking about this with Bethany at Primal Pastures yesterday. Most of us as men have lifted weights at some point in our lives, opened a bodybuilding magazine, or heard someone talk about creatine. Most women have never heard of creatine. And so especially for women, it's such a valuable supplement. And the data is striking. And the data is mostly with monohydrate, but we can talk about HCl too. And the data is so striking. I mean, 5 to 10 grams. The 10 gram dose is studied for bone health. So I'm thinking my mom needs to take at least 5. She probably needs to take 10. Yeah. And then the data with like brain benefits and crossing the blood-brain barrier, you have to be pretty high. I mean, 20 grams of creatine is pretty serious, but anecdotally, I don't notice any negative side effects from 20 grams of creatine a day. And I think I do notice mental performance benefits. Yeah. So what do you take?
Yeah, the magic kicked in for me north of 10, especially north of 15.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
Sure. Yeah. I've talked about that, and people are like, I want to talk to you about HCl.
HCl.
Okay, because I do retain water from monohydrate. I know some people say, oh, it goes away. It doesn't for me.
Where do you notice it?
I usually like love handle area. Like I retain a lot of water.
Interesting.
There. Yeah. Rather there. I'll do a little bit in my face, but mainly like love handle area. Like I just hold water there. And it's just, I mean, it's not the end of the world. Like the trade-off of feeling so much better a lot of times is good. But I've had numerous people tell me that, HCl doesn't work. But then I've had other people be like, no, actually HCl, you don't retain as much water.
Yeah. I mean,
so
you look at the data here, and the data on monohydrate is so clear. Like monohydrate has been studied time and time again. Monohydrate works, right? Mental benefits, bone benefits, strength benefits with weightlifting. So there's no question that monohydrate works. I'd have to look at the data on monohydrate for actual water retention, but I know from, again, anecdotal experience with my friends and myself, I don't really get GI side effects from monohydrate, but some people do. And when those people that I've recommended HCl to, they can tolerate it better from a GI perspective. Yeah. So I think that anecdotally, I haven't seen a study there. It might be out there, but I haven't looked into this deeply. Anecdotally, when people do HCl, it seems to help with some of those roadblocks with monohydrates sometimes. Yeah. Now, the dosing of HCl looks different though. Like dosing of HCl is significantly lower than monohydrate. It's like 1 to 3 grams a day, of HCl. So it's apparently in studies, it's much more absorbable,
Interesting.
bioavailable. So who knows? So I think I would love to see more research on HCl. And I basically recommend monohydrate to people. And if they don't do well on monohydrate, I say try HCl.
Yeah.
Because there's so much research on monohydrate. It's available everywhere. You can get very clean, tested monohydrate, and it's pennies a day.
Yeah, totally. Any other supplements you've added to the mix?
So I do methylated B vitamins because I have MTHFR polymorphisms, which have to do with folate metabolism, and I see it in my blood work. I see my homocysteine consistently go from 12 if I'm not taking these to 7. And I think that I know my genetics. So I do methylated B vitamins, and it's a complex of riboflavin, B6, B12, methylfolate. So it's a methylated B12 also, and TMG. So so that helps me specifically. And then I do creatine monohydrate. I do organs still. I do the heart and soil organs. I do the desiccated testicle, and sometimes I do the desiccated thymus with lung and kidney. It's called histamine and immune, and that helps with allergies or any histamine sensitivity. So that's basically what I do. And then you know what else I've started doing is a little bit of vitamin C in the form of acerola berry in a smoothie. And I just make a big smoothie in the morning. I kind of mess around with bee products. I like bee pollen and royal jelly too. And I will just throw it all into a smoothie in the morning. I make a raw milk smoothie with creatine, lineage honey. Sometimes I even throw some raw meat in there. I put in blueberries, and I put in I put in B vitamins, and I put in bee products, and I'm just like, okay, this is it.
Yeah, bee pollen's no joke, man. Talk about B vitamins. I mean, that's
it's interesting.
I notice a serious difference. I go through kicks with all these different things. There was a phase for a while there, when I was fasting a lot, where I would fast, and then I could just take bee pollen, and I would feel it just course my veins and get this crazy energy that was no relationship to calories whatsoever. It's okay, explain this, right?
And there's research with bee pollen. I was looking at this. I did a reel about this. Bee products are so fascinating. Propolis has unique benefits, probably immune benefits with propolis. But propolis is this sticky black stuff that it's like bee glue. Yeah. And propolis doesn't really have the same, it's harder to eat propolis. It has a strong flavor. And then royal jelly and bee pollen both have effects on hormones. I think there's studies for both bee pollen and royal jelly raising testosterone. Yeah. That's fascinating. Okay. And royal jelly you can find good producers. You usually have to find a good bee farm to get your royal jelly. But it's out there. And you ever had royal jelly?
It's been a while, but yeah.
It's kind of it kind of tastes like fermented honey.
What exactly is it? How does it?
So royal jelly is really interesting. When bees make a hive, right? There are drones, there are worker bees, and there are queen. There's one queen. And when the brood, so I'm not a bee expert, but I had a bee expert on my podcast, so I might get this wrong, but I'm going to try and say it all as accurately as possible. When the bees create a new colony, they choose 4 or 5 potential larvae to become queens. And they feed those larvae only royal jelly. All the rest of the larvae in the hive gets fed some royal jelly and mostly honey. So bees make honey to feed the brood. Yeah. But the larvae that are fed only royal jelly become the queen. And the first queen to emerge goes and kills the other ones. So it's like Game of Thrones stuff here. So the hive can only have one queen. And the way they make the queen is they feed this royal jelly, which I believe is I think one of the worker bees or drones actually makes the royal jelly, maybe in combination with honey, because it tastes like it has some kind of honey in it, but it's very different than honey. It looks different, it tastes different. And they feed that exclusively to these queen candidates. And then the first one to mature kills the other ones and becomes the queen.
I love bees. They're
they're so cool.
The coolest.
They are so cool.
They're just so dang cool. And if you look back in any spiritual writings, they're practically sacred. Bees are one of the most just worship is the wrong word, but just respected and cherished and so important and symbolic and spiritually active. These are such important creatures for survival across the entire ecosystem. Which is why it's so sad that so much honey is contaminated with glyphosate, and it's so hard. And you think about bees, if bees die, we are dead as humans because our food supply will collapse. Yep. We rely on bees to pollinate the plants that make food that we eat. Bees are essential. I don't think it's a good thing, but again, I think I'm going to say this correctly. There is a large colony
of bees that gets shipped around the country to pollinate the almonds. And I'm not a huge fan of the almond farming industry, but bees actually are, there's like bee trafficking, it's so like bees are trafficked around the country and used to pollinate cash crops, avocados, almonds. And neither here nor there, but that is how these crops are pollinated. If bees collapse or bees are not healthy, the almond industry would collapse. Yeah. And I'm not a huge fan of almonds in general, or the almond industry with the amount of pesticides or the amount of water they use, but like bees are essential. And so at Lineage, we actually tested 2 of the major manufacturers in the US for glyphosate, and they both came back dirty. We source 100% of our honey from the Yucatan, and we always test it for glyphosate. It's super interesting. Like, so you have to almost go, I'm not going to say there are no US honeys that are glyphosate free, but it's hard. It's much harder I feel actually better about non-US honey in terms of glyphosate contamination than US honey now, because it's hard to find it.
Yeah.
You almost have to go to honeys outside of the US to find them really clean from that pesticide.
I'm just curious your take. I mean, you look at European standards on food and things like that. They're not perfect, but they're definitely different than the US. Obviously there's different glyphosate standards over there. Like, what, in your opinion, we've had this discussion with other people, but like, what makes it different in, say, European countries versus the United States on your list? What makes it, what stands out the most?
I gotta go. I haven't been back to Europe. I was in Greece a couple of summers ago, and I need to think about it.
Why does the food taste so much better?
I think it's probably higher quality. Yeah. I think it's probably higher quality. I think that they definitely have more of a tradition. And I think that, I could be wrong about this, but I imagine the food you're going to get is less processed, less contaminated with pesticides. I mean, their standards for glyphosate are lower. In many European countries, at least a few, glyphosate has now been outlawed. Yeah. And so and I don't eat wheat, but people anecdotally will say they go to Europe and they eat bread and pasta and wheat and they lose weight. Yeah. So what is going on there? And
that's one of those anecdotes that is just,
it's so fascinating.
Too many people and myself and my wife, who has very severe autoimmune conditions, can go and eat most places. Obviously, you do have to be careful. Like, you don't just go to like a supermarket and pick up random like wheat, right? Uh-huh. But you go to like a local, she can eat it and not have a reaction. Wow. And like, you can't take that away from me. Like, I've been with her for 21 years. I know what happens to her when she eats gluten in the US. Like, don't tell me I'm full of shit. Like, when she goes there and she goes and gets like fresh baked bread in France or fresh baked bread in Italy, and she has 0 GI issues. She eats bread here. She's doubled over. She'll put on 10 pounds of water weight, and she's miserable. It's just like, that's the kind of stuff. And then people say, no, you're full. No, it's a naturalistic fallacy. I'm like, no. Okay, I don't care if there's an RCT or not. Like, it's different. Something is different. Yeah.
And I don't know if it's the heirloom wheat, the wheat is a different species. Maybe the gluten is a different isoform. I'm spitballing here. I have no idea.
There are different kinds of wheat for sure.
Right.
I know a small percentage of the wheat in Italy is exported from Canada, but it's a pretty small amount.
Okay.
And, the EU just has strong standards on that. It's just like, they don't import wheat from the US. So it's, but again, it's probably going to make a difference on where you're buying it, right? Like, I wouldn't go, I still wouldn't go into like a regular, grocery store in Italy and buy like the cheapest loaf of bread, right? That doesn't mean that you magically cross this barrier where you're still going to be selective about it. But I think a lot of it is probably just driven by consumer demand, in terms of being like, this is something that's culturally important to them. It's something that we just don't have in the United States. They culturally value the quality of their food, and it's ingrained in them as people and as families and as a culture and a society that food quality matters, and this is how we nourish our body. And because of that, there's consumer demand, so they don't feed them crap. It's not like it's this magical thing or anyone's doing anything nefarious this way or that way. It's the fact that there is a demand from the consumer for good quality food, period.
Did you see the study that came out recently on glyphosate? So there was a study, I think it was a European study, or they looked at European standards. So they used very low levels of glyphosate. It was an animal study. I think they used, I forget the actual dosing. You can fact check me on this, but there was a recent study that came out. I think it was a long longitudinal study on animals, and they gave them low doses of glyphosate over 2 years. And there was a significant increase in cancer risk in those animals. So basically they were saying, hey, look, we are using the European standard for glyphosate in humans and translating that to an animal study, and it did not look good for glyphosate. It looked potentially very harmful even at low levels. Because a lot of the studies with herbicides or glyphosate will use super high levels, and people will criticize and say humans are never exposed to that level. But in this study, they used a level that was the European standard for glyphosate. And like this is absolutely something that humans could be exposed to. And then they translate it to animals. So they're using whatever X amount of milligrams of glyphosate per kilogram. And they're using a small amount because they're using a small mouse or a rat. And over the time period of the study, the cancer rates were significantly higher. So it's like, okay, again, this is potentially more of a problem than we thought it was. And I think most people listening to this podcast know that we should try and avoid glyphosate as much as possible, but it's harder and harder.
Yeah, man.
It's harder and harder. But that was interesting to me that like they were doing studies with moderate to reasonable doses that any human could achieve of glyphosate in animals, and it looked bad. So again, it just goes back to food quality, and that's the king.
Well, before we wrap up this, man, what is, just walk me through your daily diet real quick. Like, what are you eating these days?
Yeah. So like I said, I start the morning with like the smoothie, and the smoothie is glyphosate-free honey, creatine monohydrate, probably 10 grams in the smoothie to start, bee pollen, maybe a little bit of royal jelly, raw milk, maybe some raw meats, some hardened soil desiccated organs, especially a desiccated testicle. And I'm trying to think what else is in there. I'm missing something. That's basically it. Maybe some acerola for the vitamin C, and then maybe some frozen organic blueberries. So that's the start to the day. Then at lunch and dinner, I have sort of a simple diet. I kind of repeat the same meal for lunch and dinner, and I have grass-fed beef, usually skirt steak or ribeye or filet with some fruit and some squash. So I've really been enjoying squash recently.
Squash is the bomb.
Squash is a fruit.
Yeah,
Kabocha
it's awesome,
squash.
man.
So I will eat squash and meat and fruit.
Do you eat the shell too?
No. I just could, and I put it in the oven. It's so easy. And so I just eat meat and fruit and honey and raw dairy throughout the day like that. And the macros end up being like probably similar to what you were describing for yourself. I mean, I probably have around 300 grams of carbohydrates a day, depending on how active I am. I'm pretty consistent with 160 grams of protein, give or take, per day. And I'm not trying to program it that way. It's just what it ends up being. And then
it's not ridiculously high.
No, it's like 1 gram of protein per pound of body weight. I'm only 160. I weighed myself today when we were working out, 166. And then the fat, I don't even think about the fat. It's just I get fat from butter for taste with the squash, and I get fat in the meat that I'm eating. I'm not trying to get the leanest meat. I'm not trying to restrict fat. My body comp is great right now, so I'm not really trying to like restrict anything. I just kind of eat based on the way my body feels. And I think, I'm trying to think off the top of my head, the last time I put it in Chronometer, I want to say it was like at least 100 grams of fat per day. But I will say that with 160 grams of protein and 300 grams of carbohydrates, I usually end up around 32 to 3,500 calories per day. Yeah. And I don't gain weight. I mean, this is like, where is my energy balance? Like how, like I don't even think about calories. I don't think there's no such thing as energy balance for me, because I think if you looked at me, a 48-year-old human male, 166 pounds, people would say you're eating far too many calories. You're not in energy balance. And it's like, well, I guess I am because I'm not gaining weight. So something is happening here. And again, I don't think about calories at all. I like to put my food into Chronometer every month or two and I'm like, I'm just curious, like what are the micronutrients? What are my macros? What could I shift? And it usually comes up, it's always more than like 3,200 calories a day, which is a lot. Yeah.
Well, right on, man.
Yeah.
Well, I'll link out to Lineage down below as well.
Thank you. Yeah.
And as always, man, it's a pleasure, brother.
It's always fun, man. Thank you, brother.